You guys know it very well. He gives strength to the weary, increases the power of the weak. Even youths grow tired and weary, and young men stumble and fall. But those whose hope is in the Lord will renew their strength. They will mount up with wings like eagles. They will run and not be weary. They will walk and not faint. I love that, because work in any shape and form can be a grind at times.
Hi, and welcome to Integrate, Faith, and Innovate, the podcast of the Wheaton Center for Faith and Innovation, structured to have conversations about the way that our faith impacts our day-to-day work. Our goal is to have practical tips for faithful decision-making in everyday business. I'm here with my co-host, FT Chong, and we are excited to welcome today Steve Wilhite, our special guest, who is Senior Vice President at Schneider Electric over energy and sustainability services, and also a board member of the CFI board and a Wheaton alum. So Steve, thank you so much for being with us today. We're really excited for this conversation.
Thanks, Hannah. It's good to be with you and FT.
Thank you so much, Steve. And FT, why don't you talk a little bit as we get started with our conversation about the need to have a spiritual quotient, the need to be guided by the Spirit, not just our emotions and intelligence in business. And then Steve, we'll look to you to see, what does this look like? Thanks, FT and Steve.
Great. I always mention I am not a Wheaton alum, but I'm a parent of a Wheaton student. And throughout my business career, I've always felt that Christians should be perhaps a little bit more visible instead of being stealth. And the question is, if we are visible, are we going to talk about the same things that non-Christians talk about, right? And so as we started on this podcast, we hit on this concept of spiritual quotient. Besides IQ and EQ, I think the past year has shown us that spiritual intelligence or spiritual maturity is an important component of what we bring to the workplace. And we shouldn't be shy about it. And, we talked about Christians having the ability. We have a superpower. We can pray to God. Everybody can have that ability, but there are abilities, there are attributes, there are support systems, there are all these things that a Christian has access to. So we wanted to talk to you today. You have an interesting background. So we will, I think, maybe start by just giving us a summary of your background and career in New York.
Sure, happy to do that. Thank you, FT. Let me first start by saying sometimes the impression for people watching a podcast like this or anything is that somehow a person's an expert. So let me first say I am an expert sinner before we go too far. So I'm going to share some of my own journey and challenges and struggles. But if you start to think that I'm somehow an expert in something other than being a sinner myself, then please, we got to correct that right out of the gate. But it really is a joy to be here with both of you. And I love what you're doing around the spiritual quotient piece. And I'll come back and touch a little bit on that. But today, in addition to being the husband of Gina and father of 3 kids and other things, other labels maybe, I am Senior Vice President of what's referred to as the Energy and Sustainability Services Business Group in Schneider. The company I ran, Summit Energy, that I was CEO of, sold to Schneider about 10 years ago. And it's a shock that I've survived 10 years in Schneider, because that's not the typical approach where, people get acquired and brought into a company. But Schneider is 150,000 people strong globally. The business I run is about 2,200 people distributed around the globe. I sit in Louisville, Kentucky, but I have global teams that I get to interact with. Primary purpose of the business is really to help drive companies and lead companies on their decarbonization and sustainability journey. And that covers what they spend as it relates to energy and resources. It concerns how they consume energy and related resources, and it concerns what they consume. So in terms of the buying, the consumption, and the maybe greening up, if you will, of the portfolio of consumption, all goes together. And so some of the largest global footprints in the world partner with us or outsource or use us in some manner to help them manage that effectively. So if you put that in terms of spend, it might be in a 35 to 40 billion euro or dollar range of a portfolio that we're counting on to manage.
Yeah. So we'll be on the business side for a few minutes before we get on. Is your service to save money or to help people be more green?
It's both. And so that's what I say. You can't just attack. We want to make it economic, but we also want to make it sustainable. And so that comes with how do we use the minimal amount of resources or the right level of resources to optimize. By the way, FT, at the same time, most of the globe or many parts of the globe are not electrified and don't have access to energy. And so you think of many people in places that don't have access to clean drinking water and things like that, very basic human needs. So we see the bringing of electrification also as important. So in some ways, you're bringing consumption to people, but hopefully you're bringing it in a long-term sustainable fashion that can help humanity in other ways as well.
Yeah. Just one more on the non-church side first.
Sure.
Well, in a sense, it doesn't overlap. Help me to understand global warming, net zero emissions, all the whole kind of energy, global warming, climate change. As a Christian, I find it hard to understand two sides, and you are right in the middle of all of this. Tell us what are the facts? What should we know? What should I know as a educated person?
So I've wrestled with this myself. First of all, FT, about the science around climate change, and so we wouldn't be able to fit all of that into this podcast.
Sure, yeah.
But I would say this: we can debate the science all day. All right. And you look, and some people will say, hey, an eruption of a volcano will produce more emissions in one eruption than maybe, the consumption of entire continents.
Yeah.
And all that. To me, there's an element here, a common denominator that rather, for me personally, enter the debate about the science. I look at it really from a stewardship perspective. And Hannah and I have talked about this before. And I think about what I've been charged with. And we as humans have been, endowed by our Creator to, in effect, manage and be a steward of this planet. Now, that does not mean I worship the planet itself. Right. And for many people in the climate change, net zero world, it can bleed into almost a worship of that. And that's not who I worship. I worship my Creator, okay, who created all of that. And part of my job is to take care of that. And so I've had discussions. Many people on my teams around the world are super passionate about the climate, about the environment. And I appreciate that. I am very comfortable entering a debate with them and saying, you know what, we're going to come at it from different perspectives on this. But you know what? I think we're winding up in the same place.
Sure. Stewardship and responsibility, right?
Absolutely. And so that's more of what motivates me. Now, there's clearly things that have to enter the discussion about, well, how do you measure the impact and the reductions? And so there's some element of science. Many companies are wrestling with science-based targets. How do you set targets that are driven by science? And there's arguments on both sides as to what's truly scientific and what's not. But, to me, we've got to aggressively pursue this agenda in lots of different ways.
Yeah, thank you for that. And we won't spend too much time on it. Just a lighthearted moment, which is my kids are so always nagging us about, oh, we are green, we're whatever. We hate carbon emissions. But I tell the kids, hey, the practical side is switch off the lights when you leave the room, and don't put the air conditioner on and leave the windows open. It's just like do your personal stewardship.
You're totally right. And is there an opportunity to do that? using renewable resources that God has also given to us, right?
Yeah.
And provide it to us in that way. But you're totally right, FT. I get so, when the kids were all here at home, walking through the house, turning things off. I mean, it's ridiculous. So now the good news is there's so many technologies out there where we can control that from our phones. And we can optimize that stuff. We can use AI to help optimize those scenarios. And so why not take advantage of the intelligence that God has so graciously granted to us to get better?
Yeah.
I think it's interesting as well. When I started in the sustainability research space, from a business perspective, 12 years ago now, it's been a while, I really came into it from the stewardship perspective, and then realized that sustainability and the things we need to sustain, obviously economic sustainability, the environmental piece has really been forefront in the sustainability movement, but there's also a people piece that in order to sustain businesses, that you have to engage people really well. And certainly as Christians, we're called to care for the garden and the environment. I think there's some spiritual call there, but also to care for people. And I mean, if it's okay, I'll just shift the conversation a little bit to thinking about, the spiritual, how your SQ, how your faith, kind of plays in on the environmental, but also thinking about your decision making as you ran your own company, shifted into Schneider Electric. How has your faith really impacted how you've related and, communicated with people in the business space as well over the years? Can you think of, specific examples of not just a stewardship of the natural environment, but also stewardship of people and the call that we have as Christians?
Yeah, so let me just say, I'm not embarrassed at all about driving a business to grow and be more profitable. I am not shy about that in any respect. I want to drive shareholder value in all this. So at the same time, I think there is, we have congruent interests in that the more I, as a leader of a business and providing an environment where people can flourish and use their gifts and talents the utmost. And by the way, that doesn't just mean believers, because it's not like this is a business that's stamped by the kingdom. Okay. This is a secular business. And, so I'm not at all shy about that. But I think I have to provide an environment that both gives an opportunity for people to really grow and flourish, make money for the shareholder, and be profitable. By the way, if we're not profitable, we will not be sustainable. And produce value and good and service for a world that needs it. And so that's why me personally, I'm more driven by the serving side of the business than I am necessarily in producing products. So even though our company produces many, many great products, for me, it's driven more on that service side. But by the way, one quick aside on that, I do love the SQ kind of framework that you all have focused on, because a good buddy of mine, Rob McKinnon, and I think both of you may know him, wrote the book, Lead Like You Were Meant To. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that on the podcast.
Yeah, but, absolutely.
He uses the 4 dimensions in his coaching and in his writing: the physical, the intellectual, the emotional, and the spiritual, with the spiritual being at the center. And we all have a spiritual component, as you all have said. Now, for a believer, that may come from hopefully a Christ-centeredness and a Christ followership, but for others of other faiths that we have spread across our organization, it may come from a different source. My job as a leader is not to sit and criticize their source, but also to remain true to who I am.
Yeah, I think Hannah spoke to. If you haven't read it, you should.
In her wisdom,
the concept of servant leadership has been. There you go.
I got that
one. Thank you, Steve.
I love it, actually, Hannah. I do.
There's some things that have flowed from the Christian conversation into normal leadership, servant leadership, right? Is now a term that a lot of people use, but it was initially applied to Jesus, right? And so there are many wisdom things that really can be shared with non-believers, servant leadership being an example. How about your own personal qualities? I would say for me, it's being a believer. I have much more courage. I think I was born maybe more timid than normal. But being a believer has given me much more courage to make difficult decisions.
Yeah.
Yeah. What are some of the things that may have come into your business life because of your faith, because of your SQ?
Yeah, I think FT, what you're talking about, one, I can totally relate because oftentimes as leaders, we have to make decisions in the gray zone.
Mhm.
And I think what's helpful for me with regards to my faith is my faith really helps me push it into the black and white, if you will, as opposed to just gray. I don't know how to describe that other than to say, you know what, at the end of the day, this is the common denominator that I fall back to. Now, I'd like to think that I'm not just falling back to it. I'd like to think it's integrated throughout. And I think that's a journey that we're all on, is how to make it not a fallback, but integrated all the way. But that's an area that really seems to help me push it out of that. And by the way, I would add, I think it helps us as believers be more decisive and more willing to take risk in some ways. Now, I probably shouldn't say more, but because it sounds like I'm comparing, but it certainly helps me more appropriately evaluate the risks and decisions in some ways.
Yeah.
And hopefully be more decisive.
Yeah. For me, one of your main jobs is to make decisions, right? And behind that is the courage. And I find that's one of the greatest things that my faith has given me.
Yep.
The other is you have a big group of people. Humility. How does humility come into your main?
Yeah, and I think what it is not not believing that you know it all. Okay. And Hannah, I've heard you use the phrase being a lifelong learner at different times. And I think it comes from the willingness and openness to be learning all the time. I'll tell you an area that right now is hot in addition. Well, first of all, the sustainability space is extremely hot, as you both know. I mean, it's frothing. But also the DE&I, diversity, equity, and inclusion overall space. And you know what? I have to learn more. Mm-hmm. And I have to be willing to listen and continue to learn where maybe some of my hidden biases are. And I think I've had to learn lessons in humility of how to, when and where do I shut up and really listen and evaluate? Hey, am I thinking about this the right way? But then also FT, combining that with the boldness to recognize where I'm falling short, but also recognizing other things. I'll give you one quick example. Just a few days ago, I was on a call with our employee resource group locally. And at times I get frustrated because maybe they're carrying initiatives that I wouldn't necessarily be carrying. I mean, like, why are we doing this? And they were showing me a calendar of events. And on that calendar of events, it showed different things that are being celebrated or pointed out each month. And you can probably imagine the list. But one of the things was Diwali, the Festival of Lights, in November. And then I saw on the calendar was in December was a holiday party. And I challenged the group back and say, hey, look, I'm not challenging you on why we put Diwali in November, but the roots of Diwali is Festival of Lights started in a religious aspect where it's worshiping the goddess of prosperity, I believe. And so that's the roots of Diwali. And the roots of Christmas, by the way, which has also become secularized. It has both a religious and secular, but for some reason we can't say Christmas party. Yeah. I don't understand that. So I think there's also a sense of both humility to listen, but then humility enough not to hide my own reaction necessarily in there and challenge.
I get you. You work in a big company. I work in a big company, and to some extent earned. Christians have alienated a lot of people. So if you say a Christian thing, it evokes a naturally hostile reaction.
It does.
Yeah. So actually, I just participated on a small panel. Actually, only 3 people for LGBTQ plus group at my workplace. I said I'll be an ally. I'll join you guys as an ally. So I came in and I said, I approached this with humility and respect. I want to learn. There's so much, just like climate change, there's so much I want to learn. So
Right.
I want to listen. I want to learn what is the issue. What are the pain points? What can I do, right? And I also said, we get one view of Christians as judgmental people, but I wanted to be active to say the other side of Christianity is also we're here to serve. I'm here to serve, not to oppress. So it's the opposite of oppression, and I'm here to help bring justice, not to judge. So neither judge nor oppress, but serve and bring justice. And that's one side of Christianity that really should not be ashamed to express itself in the workplace. And so, in a sense, I hope that was positive. In big companies now, I think Christians should speak up and not speak up in a oppressive way, but be present. Be present. Don't cede the workplace to other voices. We should be the ones out there pushing mercy and justice.
Yeah, I would just add to it, FT. I think there's an element of speak up but act up. Okay, and so it should be both. Like, I think the Holy Spirit provides us opportunities where we should be, speaking up in ways that maybe we might hesitate too much. But I think also we're called to work, and this is where the whole faith and work needs to be completely blended, because I can't separate my foundation from my work hours. I don't think any of us can do that. Otherwise, we're putting one in a closet and another one. I really feel strongly about that. And so I would like, and I think we've talked about this in the past a little bit, Hannah and FT, I want to be the leader that members of these diverse communities know as a Christian and want to work for.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. It'd be interesting to hear from you as well. And you're a Wheaton alum, so you went to Wheaton College for your undergrad, and even if listeners didn't go to a Christian undergraduate school, and you're a Christian now in the workplace, we all have experiences in places like Wheaton, whether it's our church or other places where you have a learning or a growing space where everybody is of the same mind. We all have the same faith. At Wheaton, it's all Christian. In churches, you all have the same faith agreements. Could you talk a little bit about kind of your journey over your career and the journey in your faith of going from Wheaton College into a secular workplace, and how has your faith been shaped over the years? How has God gotten your attention so that you're sitting in front of us, with the perspective that you have now of wanting to be that Christian voice in secular spaces and wanting to, communicate the gospel in the way that you have over the years? What's shaped you? What have been your maybe critical key points over the years?
Yeah, a couple quick ones. It's a great question. I mean, first of all, I think I'd go back to pre-Wheaton. My dad was a pastor for many years while he was alive. And I had phenomenal parents, both my mom and dad. And one of the things, 5 kids, so I have 4 siblings, by the way, 3 went to Wheaton. The one is on a redemption plan. But one of the things my dad always emphasized with us is he'd tell us kids, he'd say, you are in full-time ministry regardless of what you do. So anybody that thinks that you have to follow in my steps of being a pastor because I was a pastor or in ministry is wrong. And he said, you're in full-time ministry regardless of what you do, and the only thing that differentiates you is a paycheck. And he really emphasized that. And I'm so grateful for him, really drilling that in with all of us kids, but certainly with me. So at Wheaton, yes, for me, it was refreshing because I'd gone from all the schools I went through K through 12 were all public. And, it wasn't always easy being Christian in a public school setting. So in a way, Wheaton was a breath of fresh air, but then immediately after Wheaton, get plopped out. And I would say one of the key things for me, in addition to, how my parents invested in me, was I was thrust from the word go into situations that required me to speak up. So back to your boldness comment, FT, I was stuck because I couldn't not say anything. Okay. I couldn't say nothing. I think a key thing is being thrust into situations where your faith is challenged. And that's happened to me repeatedly, where I almost get into a situation where I better say something. I have to say something. I don't have a choice. And then I engage in the dialogue. And by the way, I learned early on how to have a welcoming, open dialogue with somebody that doesn't believe exactly as I do, and not make it deconstructive, so to speak. So I would say that. I'd also say, so it's not just the speak up, the act up part. I'll also throw in there, for you. And I think I've shared this before. One of my favorite Bible stories or passages is the life of Joseph, because his career was awesome. He went from the bottom of the well to the top of Potiphar's household, the bottom of the jail to the top of the jail.
Yeah.
To becoming CEO of Egypt, essentially. That's his career path. And along the way, each one of his leaders, would make the statement to him. You can read it in Genesis. They'd say, the Potiphar saw that the Lord was with Joseph. And so he advanced him. The jailer saw that the Lord was with Joseph. Pharaoh saw that the Lord was with Joseph. In each of those instances, it didn't say Joseph told him. So there's an act up, but there's also, there's a speak up, but there's also an act up. And I would love it if at the end, the leaders I work with would go, they saw that the Lord was with Steve. Now, I'm not, so anyhow, I'll pause.
No, thank you. Joseph is one of the few almost faultless people in the Bible. He did.
So I'm not putting myself in that category. FT.
No, he did mess around with his brothers a couple of times.
Exactly.
But this brings up a good point, which is in your job, and I tell you in my job, because I invest in private companies, and through periods, there are periods of layoffs and where you have to fire people or put people on furlough or whatever it is. And I'm sure you have had to do it. And it's not one person, but could be tens or hundreds. I had a company where overnight we laid off 1,200 people. And you have to harden yourself to do it a little bit. There's no easy way if there's no money to pay people. And I just want to, maybe you can relate your experience, but in Joseph's side, Joseph also had to harden himself to suffer all that he suffered. But he came out soft in the end, because there are two passages where he started crying, which showed he didn't turn into this piece of stone that was ruling Egypt, but inside he still had the kind of the emotions of a human, someone who loved his family, right?
Yep.
How about yourself?
So I would have said it slightly. I agree with the overall concept there, FT. I would say that in those situations, I've had to go through restructurings that have involved hundreds of people in different occasions. Okay. Fortunately, I've been part of a business that's been growing, but oftentimes you might be pursuing a path that requires a retrenchment and go in a different way. And skill sets aren't necessarily the right skill sets or in the right geography. So I've had to do it. I've tried to reverse that thought of, instead of hardening up, softening up. Because I want to try to put myself in the position of the person, regardless of whether it's exiting through a restructuring or exiting because of a firing for other reasons, put myself in the seat of that person, and then me be found doing the right thing in each instance. So we get faced with those decisions all the time, but I think it's more of that's where you combine the boldness and courage with the soften and understanding. And I wish I could say there was a perfect formula for that. But I think it's finding that balance.
I just wanted to bring this up because for our listeners who could be young people or people who are leaders as well, we all a little bit hardened up a little bit the past 18 months to survive COVID. In a sense of, I got to be tougher, but not to harden so much that the shell has become the entire entity that as we come out of this to remember that you don't have to be tough all the time and then kill the softer parts of your personality or your being, which is the caring about people and more positive emotions and all of that, which I think is also, your story of Joseph. I'm just picking up on that, and that what it taught me, that don't turn into a hard person just because you've gone through hard times.
Yeah, and I think going along with that, FT, it's about knowing people's stories. I really believe. I mean, I can't know 2,200 stories, in their entirety, but when I'm interacting on video calls, I know that every person I'm interacting, I have to remind myself, by the way, is coming to that video call with a story that's going on, and I may not know the story behind the scenes that they're not showing on that video. And I can tell you there's so many times where the story has ended up coming up. And sometimes I'm not paying attention in the story, and other times I am paying attention. And there's been times where I've thought, boy, there was something going on there, and I'll shoot the person a note later. But I really think it's about paying attention to the stories, because everybody's going through a different aspect of this right now.
Yeah.
I think as we kind of draw to the end of our time together, it'd be amazing if you've talked about Joseph, but are there specific passages in scripture that have guided you and have been kind of anchors to you over the years as you've persevered and stayed soft and humble throughout your amazing experiences in business?
Feels like it goes through all kinds of, of phases on that. I mean, my parents used Isaiah 40:29 through 31 as their life verses, and I love it too. And I feel like I've adopted that from them. You guys know it very well. He gives strength to the weary, increases the power of the weak. Even youths grow tired and weary, and young men stumble and fall. But those whose hope is in the Lord will renew their strength. They will mount up with wings like eagles. They will run and not be weary. They will walk and not faint. I love that, because work in any shape and form can be a grind at times. Now, someday we're going to be in heaven where work is perfect, and we're all going to be working. It's going to be awesome because we're using our gifts and talents. And so, that's a passage that's kind of been an anchor for me, but I also go through phases. Right now, I shared with you guys some of the challenges my youngest brother's going through. He's the best salesperson I've ever met. And the reason is because he's interested in people's stories. And I've seen him in the hospital in the Shepherd Center in Atlanta over the past few months. The whole staff, nurses, therapists, other patients that are there, he knows their stories. He's taking the same set of gifts and talents that he's used in the work environment, and he's just naturally using them in a hospital right now. And I'm watching that play out. And so passages around how are we using the gifts and talents and all that. But in magic mark or Sharpie on his fist, every day he's got S-E-C-H. Okay? S-E-C-H. Romans 5, trials bring about suffering. Suffering produces endurance. Endurance produces character, and character produces hope. And the hope will not disappoint. Okay? And you know the passage in Romans 5.
Yeah.
And right now, I'd say that's an area that I'm really dwelling and trying to rest in, if you will. Because it's and not that everything we do in our work is a drag. Okay, there's joy and praise and fun, and you both know this, but that particular passage is especially meaningful.
Yeah.
I think then as we close, and we'll go around and kind of all three of us maybe contribute one takeaway, one practical tip for a listener that they can take from this conversation and say, do this tomorrow. Not just in your work to see profitability, but to serve God as you steward what he's given us all to do really well. What would be one, I think for me, actually, the space of thinking about perseverance, but persevering in humility and softness is actually my takeaway for tomorrow. And the rising up when you get weary and remembering, gosh, that's such a great, thank you for sharing that verse, Steve. Just such a great reminder that there's an expectation that we will weary, but there's also our expectation in God that he's there to restore us and renew us. And so let's persevere, but not persevere without hope. Persevere in humility and kindness and awareness of others. So I think I did like 4 takeaways for application tomorrow. But each of you, what would you say from this conversation? Man, I think this is one thing as a listener you should do tomorrow.
Let me start.
Okay.
I feel great joy in this conversation. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Hannah, and energized. So this has been a good break for me. I can get back to work energized. I just want to remind people of the word joy, second fruit of the Spirit, which is Hebrew simcha, and in Greek kara, which is the sister word of charis, which is grace. And that I think as believers, there is so much joy engaging with other believers, but also doing our work, and just not to forget the joy. I mean, I feel it, and I remind myself there's enduring joy that just is flowing through us all the time. So thank you. I really enjoyed this.
So you want me jumping in?
Yes, please.
I think the reminder and one of the takeaways for me is the energy I get from interacting like this with fellow believers. So even though we can think back in the Wheaton experience as everybody's in a bubble, in a cocoon, there's something very refreshing about just a conversation with the two of you, and how encouraging that can be to go back and say, you know what, I'm not paying quite as much attention as I should be. So I'm preaching it and saying it, but I'm going to remind you that I'm an expert at sinning and forgetting. But so it's a reminder for me that how just fruitful the fellowship can be.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Steve. And as we close today, would you mind just praying that God just cements all of this in our hearts and in the hearts of our listeners as we close?
I will. I'd love to. Thanks, Hannah.
Thank you.
Heavenly Father, you are so good to give us teammates on this journey of life to go through together. I am so grateful for that, and I thank you for that. And I also thank you for the work that you give us to do. And so, Father, as we come before you, we just lift up that each one of us that's either in this podcast or listening to it or watching it would really act on what the gifts and talents that you've given each one of us in the work you've called us to do. And so I pray that we're faithful and obedient. I also want to throw in there, I pray that you throw in front of us some instance or some event where it allows us to use the platform that we've been given with our faith in you and faith in your Son for your kingdom. Throw it right in front of us. Make it so obvious that we take the action. And so thank you for my brothers and sisters on this call. You're so good. And we thank you for this time in your Son's name. Amen.
Amen. Well, Steve, thank you so much for joining us today. And we're so excited for all that you're going to do for the kingdom of heaven and all that God has for you in this next season. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, FT. Good to be with both of you.
Yes.
Thank you.